Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Unconditionally Worthy podcast. I am just so grateful that I get to do this as part of my work. I am really honored to have the guests that I have on this podcast, and it lights me up to have these thoughtful and intentional conversations about our life and self-worth and all the many things that we navigate. And so I'm grateful for you for listening. That really means a lot to me. And my hope, as always, is that these episodes are incredibly helpful to you on your self-worth journey. So my guest today is Jamila Reddy, and we have a really thoughtful conversation about lifestyle design, designing your life, and how that intersects with claiming your worth and how we can own our desires and tolerate disappointment. And it's an incredibly powerful and shifting conversation that I know you're going to get so much out of. We talk a lot about sort of self-care and practices that help us to prepare for the game of life, prepare to play full out in the game of life so that when we get bumps and bruises and experience challenges, we can navigate those with grace and not take ourselves out of the game and not just leave ourselves on the sidelines because we're afraid of the challenges that may come. I want to remind you that I have a course called Date Yourself, 4 weeks to a healthy relationship with you, which is really all about building a healthy relationship with yourself and building some of these capacities and skills to help you play full out in the game of life. So you're going to be dropping self-criticism, which often keeps us on the sidelines. You're going to learn the practices of self-compassion, which help to soothe you and regulate your nervous system and calm you and help you tune into yourself so you know what you want and you know what you need and you're taking care of yourself. And then you're also going to learn how to engage in sustainable and personalized self-care, right? Figuring out what you need to take care of yourself and then engaging in an actionable plan to integrate that into your life. That's what you learn and what you're guided through in my course, Date Yourself, 4 weeks to a healthy relationship with you. So if this conversation that I have with Jamila resonates with you, I encourage you to follow her, check out her resources. And I also encourage you to check out my course, Date Yourself, 4 weeks to a healthy relationship with you. It'll be linked in the show notes. You can learn more about it if that seems like something that would be helpful in you playing your life full out. Let's get into the show. Welcome to the Unconditionally Worthy podcast. In this podcast, I will guide you on your journey to connect with the true source of your self-worth. I'm your host, Dr. Adia Gooden, a licensed clinical psychologist who believes deeply that you are worthy unconditionally. I am very excited to welcome Jamila Reddy to the podcast today. Jamila is a manifestation coach, well-being educator, and breathwork / meditation guide whose mission is to live well and support people in creating lives they love, weaving together ancient wisdom, psychology, neuroscience, and interior design. Jamila shares tools and techniques that all people can use to navigate transformation and experience more peace, joy, and fulfillment in their lives. Jamila has spoken for TEDx, Facebook, Google, Afropunk, Kripalu Center for Yoga and Health, the Loveland Foundation, and more. And I am so excited to have Jamila on the podcast because I have been following her on Instagram and I get her emails, and everything she shares just feels really authentic and guides us into deeper wisdom. And so I'm really excited to have you on the podcast today, sharing your wisdom with us. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, I would love to start our conversation where I start all of our conversations on this podcast, which is by asking you to share a bit about your own self-worth journey.
Okay. I mean, I'm like, where do I begin? I think the self-worth journey, it begins in childhood, right? Like, I think as we are children and we start to come into just knowing ourselves and noticing our differences. And so I grew up in the South. I grew up in Charlotte, North Carolina, and was in predominantly white spaces in school. And I was considered academically gifted, which put me into, a certain level of classes where most of my peers in school were white. And I participated in extracurriculars like ballet and
Mm,
and theater and choir, most of which were predominantly white spaces. And so my sense of self worth as a kid was largely defined by feeling othered in a lot of
mm,
othered around my peers, was wholly and totally loved and embraced by my parents and my family, affirmed. I mean, my parents
mm,
were so affirming. I felt um, I had a sense of internal worthiness that I felt confused about being different.
mm,
That made me not necessarily feel unworthy, but definitely self conscious. And I think that
mm,
self consciousness over time can sort of erode your sense of self worth. And so
mm,
my teenage years and early 20s was a process of getting comfortable with myself and celebrating all of the things that make me unique and doing a lot of unlearning of the
mm,
patterns and habits of behavior that I adopted when I felt different, when I
mm,
felt hyper visible. When you're the only one in the room. In the South, they call it the fly in the buttermilk. So when you're the fly in the buttermilk and everybody can see,
mm,
I wanted to either hide, like I really wanted
mhm,
to shrink into the background, or I wanted to be excellent. I really wanted to be
mm.
a star. Like if everyone's going to be looking, I want to give them
Yep.
something to see. And so I had this
Mhm,
years, still to this day, to sort of chip away at that, at those patterns of perfectionism and people
mm,
pleasing, and also kind of shrinking into the background. And so, yeah, I'm still working on freeing myself. I sometimes will call myself a recovering perfectionist.
mhm,
It's like, yeah, I have to constantly to this day give myself permission to show up authentically. But I know that impulse to sort of be impressive has deep roots in my childhood. And
mm.
that was something I needed to do to be safe and to be welcome and to be accepted.
Thank you for sharing that. I think, your experience definitely resonates with me. And I know that it'll resonate with the people listening because, yeah, these sort of like, oh, the perfectionism, the standing out, the sort of tension I think so many Black women experience, in particular, this, invisibility and hypervisibility and the sort of tension between experiencing both of those things sometimes ironically kind of at the same time. It's like people really see you but they don't really see you. um Intonation matters there, right? And I even was thinking when you said the fly in the buttermilk, I've heard that phrase before, but what came to me when you shared it was like, oh, and inherently if you have a fly in the buttermilk, that's a problem,
Right.
right? You don't want it there. You don't want to fly in your buttermilk. You want to get it out.
Right.
It's messing up the situation, right? Like it's disturbing something, right? It may have ruined or spoiled something, right? So inherently in that message or that feeling of being the fly in the buttermilk, it's like there's a problem with me being here. And that may be sometimes communicated explicitly, but often it's communicated implicitly.
That's right. And it's more felt. I mean, people were so kind to me. I was never in spaces where there
Mm,
were, as a child, my teachers were kind and loving. But there were some, little microaggressions like, oh, you read so well. You're so articulate. Like those little things
mm-hmm,
where I was like, oh, there's I wanted to be, that's where I wanted to be impressive because I'm like, oh, people are somehow, looking at me differently, not necessarily treating me poorly, but I
mm-hmm,
internalized the unspoken narrative or question of like, I kind of feel like I don't belong. Uh,
hmm,
I think belonging was something that I was seeking for many, many years. And I'm grateful now that I feel
hmm,
a really profound sense of belonging in my chosen family and communities that I'm.
hmm.
But yeah, it's like even it's sometimes the treatment is not aligned with the feeling. It's like
Right.
nobody was mean to me. My people weren't mean to me.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely felt other.
And that, I mean, I think that disconnect between how people are treating you on the surface and how you feel
Yes.
can be a little crazy making
Yeah.
because you're like,
What's
well,
up?
is it just me or is
Yes.
this true or am I overreacting or what, it's like that can be so hard. And I think as kids, we're most likely to conclude, oh, it is me. Right.
Yep.
I do have to change. I have to feel like I belong. I need to change myself or, whatever it is. And so I think that's why naming the experience and, the microaggressions and all of those pieces of feeling like all of you isn't accepted is so important so that we're not feeling like, oh, I have to change in order for that acceptance to happen. Because maybe you can fade into the buttermilk, you can
That's right.
disappear, but you're still not going to feel fully accepted.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or fulfilled. I mean, how could you? I
No.
think if you're not being yourself, there can be,
No.
that to me is just a major barrier to like joy and fulfillment and well-being. Like that to me is a slow death of the spirit, is to not
Mm.
authentically, like how could there be joy if you're living your whole life in a performance? So
Mm.
I have to go.
What? Yeah. Slow death of unfulfillment. Is that what you said? It was
I,
really like
yeah, slow death
powerful
of the spirit. I mean, of the
of the
soul.
spirit. There we go. Yes.
Yeah, like a spiritual, when I think about holistic well-being, I think a lot
Mm.
about, the obvious. We think about our mental health and we think about our physical health. But for me, there's like a spiritual well-being, or like a soul. My beloved
Mm.
friend calls it like, he says like on a cellular level, like instead of a cellular level,
I love it.
like on a cellular level, if you're not being
Mm.
we are, that to me puts a cap on the amount of well-being you can experience. Your
Mm.
this kind of animating life force that makes you, that makes each of us uniquely who we are. If that part of us is like suppressed, I think
Mm.
there's just absolutely a limit to the amount of joy and fulfillment we can feel.
I completely agree. And what it's making me think about is there's a lot of sort of like like funny memes or sort of narratives around like self-care these days, and it's like, oh, self-care, it's just like another checkbox, it's another like there's all this like people are creating a life that looks really good on the outside but they're miserable. And I think that the missing piece is what you're talking about, which is, are you fulfilled at a soul level? Are you happy? Are you, I talk about it as sort of, are you grounded in your worthiness? And I think we're missing that ingredient because we're not talking about that, right? That you could have the job that looks good with a good salary, have the partner that looks good with it, whatever, have the kids, have the house, you could have all of those things and still feel miserable if at a cellular level where you're not sort of aligned with what you're meant to be doing, with how you're meant to be living, with what actually fills you up, nourishes you, brings you joy. And I think that is this piece that's sort of missing from our conversations about how to build a life that's fulfilling and sustainable and what we really want, not just the sort of outside of it.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. I always tell something I offer, and this is I'll offer it to everyone listening and to you, is that, when we're thinking about the things we're calling in, I like to, I teach and coach on manifestation. And so a lot of times um, people are super focused on the goal, like the external desire, like you said, the house, the kids, the car, the job. But behind or not even behind, but at the core of everything we want is a feeling. You want the
Mm,
house so you can feel safe and stable and rested. You want the
mm,
partner so you can feel loved and supported and connected. You want the children so you can feel purposeful and a sense of belonging, which all of those things we have access to without the external. I think we get
mm-hmm,
hyper focused on what the external thing is, but it's like, no, you can have the house but not feel secure or
mm-hmm,
surrounded, like you said. And so, I remind people, when you're manifesting, know what's at the heart of your desires, what's at the core. How do you get to the essential nature of what you want so that you can start infusing your life with that essential nature before the external manifests? So it's like, I don't
Mm-hmm.
have time to wait for children to feel a sense of purpose. So what can I do in
Mm-hmm.
my life just as it is to infuse that value and infuse that feeling? I call it a feelings goal. I'm like, make a list of your,
Mm-hmm.
what are all of the ways that you want to feel? Because that's what's really important. It's like, don't get it twisted. Like, a lot of times we think the external things, when I get it, then I'm going to feel the way I want to feel. And I'm like, actually, instead
Mm-hmm.
of facing the thing, follow the feeling.
I love that. And my understanding, I'm not an expert in manifestation, but my understanding is that the more you can tune into and feel those feelings now, the more you're on the right vibration, in alignment with what you are wanting to attract and bring into your life. So it's more likely to happen more
Yeah.
quickly. It is going to come. And then I think from the perspective of self worth, if you're not feeling worthy of
Mm,
the connection, of the grounding, of the abundance, of whatever, it is going to be harder to feel into it. It's going to be also harder to receive it and accept it. And so if you're sort of noticing like, ooh, like, I don't know if I feel worthy of connection, or I'm scared of connection because I don't believe that people will love and accept me, then it's like, okay, so then there's some work that we can do now with you loving and accepting yourself and offering that to yourself and leaning into the fact that you're worthy. And then that's going to help you get into that vibration and attract those things. And again, as you're saying, not wait for them to be sort of far off, and have them now, create them in your life now.
yep, exactly right.
This is making me think, or I think it's connected to some of the work that you do around lifestyle design and sort of guiding people to intentionally design their lives. And I think there are links with what we're talking about now, and also where we started with sort of when we can be in a space of sort of reacting to what other people want from us, into performing what other people will approve of, and how that can be sort of the opposite of intentionally creating and designing the life we want. So I'd love for you to talk about what lifestyle design is, and then kind of how you encourage people to think about that for themselves.
Yes. So, lifestyle design is a framework that I created to understand some of the pillars, I call them the pillars of a fulfilling life, of a joyful, fulfilling life. And I love the language of design because, to me, it makes me think of a creative practice. And I encourage
Mm,
people to see your life as a creative practice, to see yourself as the creator over your life. That each of us have within us, we just come into the world with this inherent creative power and ability to shape our lived experience. It doesn't necessarily mean that we can control our circumstance, right? Like, there has to be some, acknowledgement of the very real social, political, environmental, economic realities. And regardless of what is happening around you or even to you, there is a creative life force that exists within that we can tap into to shift the experience we're having in every moment, moment to moment, every single day, but in our life at large. And so lifestyle design is a practice of seeing your life as your masterpiece. Like, if you are the artist,
mm,
your life is your most magnificent creation, and you get to put your style on it. Like, you get to really
mm,
design it however, according to your preferences, according to what, like you said, what lights you up. And so lifestyle design is the process of creating, intentionally creating a life that lights you up. And design, the word design comes from a word meaning to decide. So you can even hear
mm,
decide, design. And so when you're designing an experience, what you're doing is deciding what it's going to be like. And so to be
mm,
a lifestyle designer is to just make choices. is just to be in the choice making chair of what choice do I want to make, of just recognizing your absolute inner authority and power to make choices about the way you do your life. It's not necessarily the what. Like I get, I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes, I have friends who like live with chronic illness, and it's like, no,
Mm,
these people they didn't choose to have lupus, or or to have like migraines every day. But you can choose the way you move through your life, the way you, like you said, respond to it. And so it's kind of it's a framework, and it's a way of seeing yourself, and a way of moving through the world, with an empowered perspective, with an understanding of yourself as a creator,
mm,
and with, like, it's just a permission slip to create a life that is based on what you enjoy, really truly what
mm,
you enjoy. Like, enjoyment is absolutely crucial. And so and I think for me, there can be no holistic well-being without joy, without happiness.
mm,
And so to be the lifestyle designer is to actually create your masterpiece based on, like, I might have a friend who like really likes hot pinks and neons. And I'm like, you know what? That's cool for your design, but my design is going to look like this. And so it's really like knowing what is authentic to you. Like, what do
mm-hmm.
you like, and creating your masterpiece based on your authentic preferences and desires.
Mm. I love that so much. I mean, I think there's a couple of things that come up for me. So one is the intentionality, right? And it's, one of the things I've been realizing for my own life recently is like, I was having a conversation over my birthday brunch, and a friend asked me a question like, when do you work? When do you do the best type of work? And da, da, da. And I was like, oh, like, part of my problem is that I'm reactively creating my schedule. It's like, oh, these are the meetings people have asked me for, or these are the times. And then I'm like fitting myself around it. And I'm like, that's a problem. That's part of why I feel stressed. And so it's like the intentionality of designing and deciding proactively to say, hey, here's the schedule that I want. And here is, what I want my home space to look like. And here's the relationships that I want. And so I love that sort of taking and owning your power as a creator, and then deciding. And some of what's involved in that is actually slowing down to tune into, what do you want? Right. I think some of us can get so caught up in sort of a victim mentality, right? And that's not to say that there aren't experiences and traumas and systems that can victimize us, right? Or that can be oppressive. And we always have some agency and choice. And we often have more agency and choice than we think we have, right? You gave the example of a chronic illness, or, things like that. And my daughter has, she has sickle cell, right? So sometimes that means we have to go to the hospital, and it's really frustrating and it's really disruptive. And I can still choose how I show up
That's right.
for and with her in those moments, for and with myself, for and with my partner, and in the hot, right? Like, I can still choose. What do I like? Go kicking and screaming and frustrate and vent, and that's okay if I'm frustrated, and that's valid. But do I create a bunch of suffering around this experience, or do I sort of move with it with grace, with presence, with compassion, right? And so I think that powerful place of saying, hey, I'm not going to be, at the mercy of my life. I'm going to be a creator in my life. And that doesn't mean I'm controlling everything. It means that I move with intention, and thoughtfulness, that I'm making decisions about what I want my life to look like and how I want to kind of engage in the process of my life, is what I hear you saying.
It's exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And my mind is always going to worthiness stuff. So I'd love to hear, I have thoughts, but I'd love to hear your thoughts about how you think sort of people, claiming their role as a creator in their life and designing their life connects to people claiming their worth and owning the fact that they're worthy.
Yes. So, my personal belief is that we are inherently worthy of everything it is we want. And that is universal. regardless. That the moment we were born, that was the
Yes.
only qualification we needed to meet in order to have a beautiful life, was showing up on the planet, assuming a body, right? I'm like, if you
Mm,
are like, have I done enough? I'm like, if you're here, you've done enough to be deserving of a beautiful life, to be deserving of
mm,
having your desires met, to be deserving of ease and of joy and fulfillment. I'm like, that's it. You just were born. Like, you already, every qualification you needed to met, it happened on whatever your birthday was. That's when you fulfilled the only thing you needed to fulfill in order to be worthy, is to be alive. To me, to be a human
mm,
being alive is the source of your worthiness. And so for me, I see that, my humanity is the only requirement that I needed to meet in order to be deserving of everything that I want.
mm,
And that I also believe that part of why we assume a body, why we are born, is to live well, is
mm,
to live well and to live fully and to fulfill our unique mission, whatever our mission is on this planet. I think each and every person has a unique mission that only they can fulfill. And that fulfilling that mission is also a source of our joy. And so I think the way that worthiness connects to lifestyle design is it's giving yourself permission to have what it is you want, whatever
mm,
it is. I think about, I have this concept that I like to use called the highest vision, which is like, what is your
mm,
most like, I always ask my clients, if you had a magic wand and you could really just wave, if you had magic powers and you could say, if I had unlimited money, unlimited resources, unlimited whatever I needed, no obstacles, every obstacle banished, unlimited resources, what life would what would you create? And 9 out of 10 times people are like, I'd be like doing my purpose work, have a nice house. I'm like, a magic wand? And you're over here talking about like a house and like, your little project. Like, it's so sweet.
mm,
I'm like, wow, like the highest vision that we have for our lives is so within reach. I mean,
mm,
I never asked the person that question and they're like, I would take over the world. Like, no, no one has ever said anything beyond like, these are the conditions that need to be met in order for me to feel like a sense of thriving and a
mm,
sense of like, an absence of regret. And so
mm,
for me, the highest vision is like, that is actually let the highest vision, when you think about what would I do? What would I do if I actually had unlimited resources and no obstacles whatsoever? That is what you're creating. I'm like, that's your design. That's the blueprint. That's the
mm,
vision.
mhm,
And so what you're doing with all of the work is closing the gap between the highest vision and your current reality. And worthiness is just knowing that, like, you don't have to work for it, prove yourself worthy of it. You don't have to do more to be deserving. It's like, no, you actually can just have it. You've done enough.
mhm,
You've done
mm,
enough. And, I'm like, assuming most of the people who are listening to this conversation, they're not terrible people. I don't know that I've necessarily
mm,
believe in terrible people. I believe in everyone's inherent goodness, and that people have terrible things happen to them and they develop,
mhm,
they react to their circumstance and their experiences, and hurt people. Um and I think that, like, believing that you are allowed to have what you want, and that you don't have to like jump through hoops to get it, to have it, that you can just have
mhm,
it because you want it, right? Like that. It's like, you can have it because you want it and you're deserving of it because you're alive.
mm. Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with your definition of worthiness. I love it, right? The only criteria is being alive. And I think that a lot of what you're saying is, it's countercultural, right? Like, we don't, at least in the US, live in the culture that says you deserve it, especially if you are, BIPOC, a woman, right? Like, trans, right? Like,
Right.
especially if you are not fitting into the dominant sort of mainstream, um, upper class, right?
Mm-hmm.
that says, no, you're not really supposed to want things.
Right.
And if you, and only the people, only the white, wealthy, straight,
Yeah.
upper class men, those are cis men, those are the people who can want and expect to have, right? But almost everyone else, right? Many other people who fall outside of that, like, you're not expected to want, right? Like, we see that in even the narratives of, like, oh, they're using food stamps to buy lobster and steak,
Right.
right? Like, well, how dare they want good food, right? Like, how dare they want it, right? Like, they better have work requirements. You better work for it, right? Like this narrative, right? Like, that's like we see it in large and small ways, and sometimes it's in our families, right? If you grew up in a family that didn't have a lot of financial resources, like, you may have learned not to want things, right? Because you knew that the response was a parent who was already stressed, maybe already overworked, stretching, trying to make needs met, maybe graciously said, hey, you can't have that toy because we just don't have money, or maybe snapped at you, right? Because they felt some kind of way that they couldn't give you a toy and work, right? Like, and so there's lots of messages about not wanting.
Yes.
And I think, for those of us who are women of color, BIPOC, it's like you may have been socialized into not wanting.
Yes.
And so even claiming your wanting and your desire is powerful, right? Like, even saying, I want that.
Yes.
Like, that's something that I desire and that I want, and that wanting can be affirmed and it is okay and it's not a burden to anyone, is a powerful step into sort of designing your life. Because so many of us, it's like, well, what does everybody else want? What does everybody else want to eat? What does everybody else want to do? What does everybody else want to see? Right. And so it's like, well, and sometimes people need a practice of tuning into their wanting. Yeah. I even sometimes start with, like, tuning into your needing. Like, when are you hungry? When do you need to rest? When do you need, right? Like, tuning into your needing, and then we can go tuning into your desires and wanting and owning them and starting to fulfill them, even in small ways, to help you build up to, yeah, actually, I do want some big things and I'm worthy of them. And I'm going to, put myself in a place and sort of take the action that is aligned, not, overworking, but to make those things happen in my life, or to call them in.
Yes. Being socialized out of wanting is so real. And so, as a recovering people pleaser, I've had to give myself a lot of permission to put my desires and my needs first. I mean, I had this, I'm like, oh, there's this cultural narrative of I'm just so chill, like being so chill and easygoing. Like, oh, she's so easy, like she's so agreeable. Like, that's kind of a positive thing, that it's like, especially for like women, Black women especially, where it's like, oh, she's easy. You know what I mean? You don't want to ruffle any feathers. Like you said, you don't want to be a burden, because we're socialized to be the help. So what the help don't want? You're not supposed to want nothing. So I'm like, oh,
to barely even get paid. You're not even really supposed to want it. You're supposed to do it out of the goodness of your heart and your generosity and smile, and you love,
Right,
yes.
Exactly. To make everyone else around you feel comfortable and accommodated. And so I've had to engage in a very deep process of like reclaiming what I call like being picky. I'm like, oh, I love being picky and particular, because what that means in real time is that my desires are non-negotiable. I always tell my clients to see your desires as needs of your spirit, because something that your heart wants more than anything. Imagine getting to the end of your God willing long life without it. I mean, how could you be? I'm like, that just isn't thriving. Like, desires are needs of the heart. So we're like, oh, as long as if you got a roof over your head, you have, got, 32 ounces of water in the day, and enough, food not to wither away, that's supposed to be enough. It's supposed to be enough. And desires are seen as frivolous or extra. Like, oh, well, why do you want that? Like, I had someone once ask me, I feel like I really want to do this, but I don't need it. And so I feel bad for wanting it. And I'm like, start to, if you could just try to see everything you want as a need of your heart,
Mm,
need of your soul, then I think that is where that permission comes from. I'm like, no, I don't have to DJ. I don't have to do, I'm not going to die if I don't play a set on a boat somewhere at sunset. I'm not going to die. But that's just something my heart wants. I can't get rid of it. So when I think
mm,
about, like, whenever I'm doing my like yearly goals, I'm like, man, I really want to DJ a set. Like, that's really what I want to do. It's a source of joy. And so to me, my joy is a need. That's not a,
mm,
my desires are not frivolous and negotiable. Like, oh, well, if I'm not going to die in its absence, then I can just forget about it. No, that is absolutely essential to my holistic well-being. And
mm,
I'm going to give myself to be particular. And I think that, to me, contentment and fulfillment happens in the micro. It's in the
mm,
it's not this really big, like, what is the picture of your life? It's like, I have the same cup of tea every morning because I love it. I love
mm,
I'm like Earl Grey with a little milk and honey. It just delights me. And so, like,
mm,
raising the sources of my delight, putting them a little bit higher up on the hierarchy. Like, we think about, there's like a hierarchy of needs, and it's like, okay,
mm,
I don't need, I don't know, the things that I want. I don't need them. I just want them. That there's this separation of wanting and needing. And what I always invite people to do is see if you can do away with that distinction and start to see
mm,
everything you want as like essential to your fulfillment, which is, to me, I'm like, how could that be optional? If
mm,
you are inherently worthy, which you are, how could your fulfillment be optional? It just doesn't. The math ain't mathing. I'm like, I can't make sense of it. Like, I can't make sense of not having what you want, especially when it's so possible, when it's
mm,
available to you, you know?
mm.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. It makes me think of two things. So one is, so you sort of mentioned like being easy. So like I
yeah.
have never been someone who was able to be easy.
Okay. Love
Like
that for you.
I
Love
probably
that.
have tried, but I've sort of, experienced the people being like, you're kind of difficult
Yeah. It's the
and
too
you're
much,
kind of too much.
a lot.
Too much. That was like a feeling of like all throughout my childhood. And then I would try to like, okay, like let's this time, not super conscious, but like let's keep it, tone it down. And then I'd be like at parties in my early 20s debating about feminism and like arguing with people. It's like I couldn't, and then I left and I was like, oh, like I did
Do
it
it
again.
again.
But it's like I couldn't contain myself. And so in some ways there's like this beauty of that. I also then struggled with feeling like I'm too much for people. People don't really like me. Like, so
Yeah.
there's sort of like different ways that we navigate that. And so I guess to the listener, some of you may have been sort of closer to my experience of like you just couldn't keep yourself small and you
Mm,
kept busting out, and then people were kind of communicating like,
it's a lot.
could you be a little smaller? And
Mm,
some of you may have made yourselves very small, and now it's sort of this process of like, okay, let's make yourself big. Let's take
yeah.
up space, right? Like let's be full, right? Like all of that. And so we come to this, we have different responses and experiences on this journey. The other thing that I was thinking about when you were sharing is how experiencing disappointment
Mm,
and not being willing to tolerate or not able to tolerate or not having the tools to tolerate and move through that experience can shut down wanting. It's like, well, I'm never going to ask you for anything again. I don't care,
that's
right?
right.
Like that sort of
That's super.
hardness
Yes.
that we develop of like, I asked you for something, you disappointed me, you didn't show up for me. That's it. I'm done. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's cool.
That's
It's cool. That's fine. Right. Like we know, I think, especially in the Black community, like when someone says, that's cool. No, I'm
right.
good.
Yeah. No, I'm good.
You're
That's
good.
cool.
It's
Yeah.
shutting down. Like it's over. And
No,
it's not
it
cool.
is, in fact,
Right.
not cool. Okay.
Not cool.
Not cool.
So, just
Yeah.
part of, I think,
Mhm.
being willing to claim your desires is also being willing to move through disappointment when it comes, because it'll come. and
100.
not feeling like it's the end of the world, not feeling like because I was disappointed or someone wasn't able to show up or I didn't get this thing that means I'm unworthy.
That's right.
I, love the tool of self-compassion. I don't know, for you, it might be breath work, right? But you know what I mean? It's like being able to give space to the disappointment and acknowledge that the disappointment reflects your desire not being met, but doesn't mean that there was a problem with your desire. It's a human experience that we, need to learn to move through. And that I think that if we know that we can face disappointment and accept it and move through it, then it's easier also to claim our wants, because we know even if it doesn't happen, I'm not going to fall apart. It's not the end of the world, right? Like, it is disappointing. I can deal with the disappointment and I can keep wanting and desiring and move forward.
That's exactly right. And that language of being able to tolerate the disappointment, because in the pursuit of a life that lights you up, you are going to face a whole host of disappointment, fear, anxiety, sadness. I mean, there's like difficult emotions are an inevitable part of being alive. And this is something, I don't know if how much of you know my story, but from 2016 to 2018, I experienced back-to-back losses of some loved ones, of two beloved friends who died by suicide, and then my sister who passed suddenly, and then my father who died of a cancer journey. And what those truly traumatic experiences revealed to me is that uncomfortable feelings are an inevitable part of being alive. And I had spent so many years living in avoidance of uncomfortable feelings. I don't want to leap, because what if I'm embarrassed, or what if I fall and it hurts, or what if I leap and the net doesn't catch me and I'm disappointed, or what if I suffer from yearning? So I'm just not going to, you know what? I'm just going to keep it. I'm just going to be easygoing, totally okay with whatever happens, very neutral, very, this kind of like false, like being okay with whatever life throws my way. Like, I don't really care how it turns out. Attitude was actually a defense mechanism to protect me against emotional discomfort. And what I learned through journeying with grief, there is no protection. There is no protection from emotional distress and discomfort. That is a hard pill to swallow, but I can absolutely guarantee that every single human, past, present, and future, is going to experience emotional distress, emotional difficulty. You cannot avoid it. So I'm like, oh, the playing small so that you don't get your feelings hurt. Your feelings are going to get hurt, babe. They're going to get hurt. Whether or not it's because you didn't get what you wanted in the pursuit, or because your loved ones are going to transition into the ancestor realm, because that is the cycle of life and death. And so, because difficult emotions are an inevitable part of the human experience, what a gift you can offer yourself to learn how to tolerate them so that you can be with them. And another thing I learned is that they're temporary. I thought for sure the grief was going to take me under. I just knew it. I was like, I didn't want to die, but I wanted to like disappear. Like, there were moments where I was like, just fingers and just take a break. Just take a break, because it was so intense that it felt I was unable to tolerate it. But what I did was breathe and wait until the feeling passed. I'm like, oh, it's like having a guest walk in your front door with a machete and you're like, oh my God, I'm going to die. And then you look the guest in the face and you breathe. And after a few moments, they let themselves out the same way they came. But we're boarding the doors. We're like, all of the arms. It's like, no, baby, take it. I mean, and it seems so simple, but breathing saved me. That is why I teach meditation work, because these are the tools that I use to tolerate. And by tolerate, I mean be with the momentary, temporary discomfort of emotional distress. That is one of my greatest superpowers. Oh, I'm going to sit with it.
Mm,
Oh, best you
mm,
better believe what I'm going to do is absolutely drop into a diaphragmatic breath and breathe through the discomfort until it passes. Because then I can, I don't know what I was doing the other day, but I was like, I feel nervous. I was about to teach or speak. I don't even remember. I don't even remember what it was, but I just, I was like, the anxiety. And I'm like, what I know to be true is that I can make it to the other side of this. Like I know how to be with the discomfort long enough to pursue what it is I want and not live in avoidance of emotional distress. I think that's what a lot of people are doing is like, how do I minimize the likelihood that I'm going to experience an uncomfortable feeling like disappointment or hurt or grief or anxiety? How do I we're designing our lives based on how
mm,
to minimize the chances for me to feel bad. And so what I learned is like you could spend your precious resources and your creative power trying to avoid emotional discomfort, or you could spend that same energy trying to maximize emotional well-being and fulfillment. It's the same amount of energy actually, and it can't be avoided. I'm like, it's a frivolous effort. You speaking from experience, I tried. Oh, how I tried.
mm,
I tried so hard not to feel uncomfortable feelings. Guess what?
mm,
You can't. And so knowing that I can, I'm like, oh, what I can do is offer myself tools and practices and strategies is to establish an extensive toolkit of resources, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual resources that help me tolerate the inevitable discomfort of being a human on a planet.
mm,
I'm like, that's why self-care. To me, it's like that is and that's why I talk about joy as preventative medicine. And I talk about
mm,
ease as a proactive coping strategy. That the more you have joy and ease as your baseline, that's 9 out of 10 days, I got joy and ease and fulfillment as my baseline. So when something happens where it's like, ouch, not
mm,
feeling the joy, I know for sure what I'm getting back to is joy as a baseline because I've designed my life to have that be my home base. And
mm,
so that like the not being able to tolerate is something we can change. It's something we have absolute control over. You can build your tolerance. You can increase your capacity through like practicing taking a deep breath, through rest, through joy,
mm,
through letting yourself be supported, through delegating. Like there are things that increase your capacity to be able to face life head on and not live in avoidance of hardship. So, like, that is within our control.
mm. Oh, I love that. I am so grateful that you shared your experience of grief and losing people really close to you because I think it could be easy for people to listen to you talking about designing your life and creating your life and
Mhm.
joy and make the conclusion, the erroneous conclusion that, well, everything must be easy for her,
Erroneous.
right? Like everything
Erroneous.
must be fine, right? Like just, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I'm so glad that you shared it. And I agree with you, right? We could, like, the image I got when you were talking was you could make your house, right? If your metaphorical house is your life,
Mhm.
a cylinder, a concrete cylinder box
Right.
with like slit windows so nothing can get in. No one can see you. You can't see out to the mess of the world, right? And so you're protected and defended, but then you don't see the world, right? And maybe you never leave because if you leave, then something might happen, right? And so we could try to avoid it, but when we avoid the challenges of life, we also cut ourselves off from the richness,
That's
right?
it.
Like you cannot have connection and acceptance and rich, nourishing relationships without the risk of rejection. You just
Period.
cannot have it,
You cannot.
right? And so it's like, embracing this full life experience, as you're saying, giving room, right? Like part of what I was hearing is like giving space, giving breath to the hard things and making room for the good things.
Yeah.
That's when we're living life full out.
Yeah.
That's when we're thriving. That's when life is vibrant. And when we're playing small, when we're playing in protection mode, when we're trying to avoid the challenges of life, we still experience the challenges of
Right.
life, and we experience fewer joys and
That's right.
fewer less aliveness, right? And so it's like actually this game that you try to play, that your mind convinces you to try to just keep yourself safe, results in a life full of regrets, full
Right.
of like, I didn't take that chance, I
That's
didn't
right.
make that connection, I didn't go for that, I didn't prioritize my wants,
Mhm.
right? And so it's like, if you're going to experience the hurts and challenges of life, might as well play full out.
That's right.
Let your knee get skinned, you know it's going to
That's
heal,
right.
right? Like go out, right? Like get on that court, get on that field,
That's right.
and play,
Right.
instead of sitting on the sidelines thinking, but what if I get a bruise? What if I trip and fall? What if someone laughs at me? Like they're going to laugh at you anyway. You're going to trip and fall over your feet, stand on the sidelines, whatever. Like go play.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, I tell people you can prepare yourself. It's like I see people, you're like, people are manifesting, and I'm like, but do you have a morning routine? Because if you're getting on the court, like no Olympic athlete, it's like life is an Olympic game. So if you were to show up at the Olympics not having stretched, trained, you've been eating, you know what I mean, any old whatever for the last 3 months, baby, you're gonna struggle, and you're probably not gonna win. But it's like, if you don't have to just, it's like you can actually prepare yourself for the life you're calling in, and you can prepare yourself for these big leaps. That's why I'm like, self-care is foundational for manifestation, because it helps you establish, you sort of prepare you prepare yourself. You can prepare your nervous system to be set to regulated. You can actually change your default setting through a regular meditation or mindfulness practice. You can change your default setting to neutral, receptive, and calm. You can absolutely. So then you get on the court and you hurt yourself, and you're like, oh, actually, like, oh, I got my ice pack, I got my water, I got my Band-Aids. Like, you can prepare yourself so that you're not just having, I think people say like leap and the net will appear. And I'm like, okay, you can have a little like self-care kit for when you're falling. Because there's a period of time between the leap and the net where you're going to need a little, you're going to be absolutely falling, and you need to have like, maybe bring a little blanket, comfort yourself. So like comfort, like tolerating, soothing yourself, like self-soothing, bringing yourself back so that you're not just like completely, it's so vulnerable. Like you said, you have to risk rejection in order to experience connection, right? And so it's like, I think sometimes people are like, I don't want to, like, I don't have it. Life be lifing. And sometimes we just like, I actually don't have the energy or the capacity to be like vulnerable Monday through Friday. Like, I'm tired. I go to work, and then you got the, it's like there you go. Are you parenting? There's like a lot of things that sort of deplete our resources. So we don't have resources available to do the creating and to do the manifesting and to do the big leaps of faith. And so like restoring yourself and giving yourself space to return to that baseline, that homeostasis of like feeling good, like that is what prepares us to have this sort of thriving, vibrant life that you're describing, that you're talking about. It's like there are things we can do to get ready. There are things we can do to make it less likely that disruptions are going to throw us off for a long period of time. I mean, I know, when I first started off on my journey, a setback, I would do a vulnerable thing, and I would be in hermit mode. I would have to recover. I would have to be in recovery after being, Brene Brown talks about vulnerability hangovers. And so what I wanted to do was just reduce the amount of time that it takes me to recover from hardship. It doesn't mean I'm living in avoidance of hardship. No, it's the amount of time it takes me to get back to my baseline gets smaller and smaller and smaller and shorter every single time. And so just like knowing that, like, oh, there's so many things that you can do to increase your capacity for living fully so that life doesn't have to just like kind of toss you around, that you can really
Yes.
be in collaboration because you're prepared, you've trained up, you're going to the Olympics after having daily practice of stretching and moving and nourishing and hydrating and doing your mental preparation. Like you can't show up to the game and think you're going to win if you've not done any training. That is so it's like
Mm.
training, whatever that looks like to you. For me, it's breath work, it's meditation, it's nervous system regulation, but for other people it could look different. But it's like, know what you need to do to show up at your most powerful, and then honor that wholeheartedly.
Mm.
Change your life.
I love that. I totally agree. And I think, yeah, the emphasis here, these are skills that you can learn, right?
Yeah.
This is not a some people have it and some people don't, right?
Right.
Let's go back into like tapping into your power. You can choose to practice these skills, right? Like you can choose to use meditation and breath work. You can choose to practice self-compassion. You can choose to make sure you're drinking water and resting yourself and nourishing yourself. And we talked about lifestyle design, and I encourage those who are listening, like, I'm hoping you're feeling inspired because I feel like this is just like a mindset, life shifting conversation. And I encourage you to start with like one thing, because
Yes.
sometimes we can feel overwhelmed and like, where do I start? It's like, okay, maybe you need to drink more water. Maybe you're ready to start trying out meditation and you've heard about it in a way that like shifted your thinking about it this time. And you're like, okay, maybe that's going to be my training. But choose one thing and then do an experiment. Do it for a week and see how it feels. And then add another thing, right? And again, Jamila said, you're creating your blueprint of your fantasy, and then you want to create sort of these steps that you can take to build on things as you're getting closer. So it doesn't have to be everything all at once. It can be one thing and then another thing, and build on it and be gentle and kind to yourself in the process. And remember that this is not about proving or performing to the world that you do the best self-care. It's about feeling good on the inside out so that your life is designed and feels the way you want it to feel. I feel like we could talk about this for like hours. Like, I am so loving this conversation with you, and we're also like at time. So I just want to, yeah, it went by real quick. I just want to thank you for sharing your wisdom and sharing your insights. And I know that people are going to want to connect with you further, want to know like what you're up to, what you're offering. So let people know about your website and Instagram. And I don't know if you're still doing it, but that you sometimes offer guided meditations and things like that. So I'm imagining people are going to want to hear about that. So let
Yeah.
us know where we can find you.
So you can find everything that I offer on my website. It's jamilareddy.me. And my Instagram is at Jamila Reddy. As of now, I'm doing free weekly Saturday morning breathwork and meditation on Zoom. It's open to all. You can just drop in. Sessions are no longer than 30 minutes. They're for all levels. And so just a grounding practice to anchor your week. I have a library of masterclasses on my website about, just really teaching the how. Something that it's so important to me is actually like, I talk about the toolkit and the strategies. It's like, no, what are they? How do I do it? So I have a library of masterclasses that really get into the practical strategies and the techniques that you can use to sort of step into this role as the empowered creator of your life, and to navigate the difficult moments, the lows. So you could take a masterclass with me. I also offer one-on-one private coaching. So if you're interested in going deep with me, you can do a one-time 90-minute session, or you can work with me long-term. So there's lots of ways, but I'm out here on these internet streets. I'm on Instagram, and you can, scroll to your heart's desire. I offer a lot of tools and techniques on my page that I hope, I intend that those really serve people. You can like go through and hopefully take away something that can, get you started. Like you said, that one small step. So there's lots of resources there, and yeah, I'm around and would love to hear from y'all.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I so appreciate your time, your energy, your wisdom.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And same to you. This was such a joyful conversation.
Thanks for joining me this week on the Unconditionally Worthy podcast. Make sure to visit my website, dradiagooden.com, and subscribe to the show